Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break, Megan and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, today we're talking about declining enrollment. It's a problem across the country. We're going to talk with two district leaders here in California, tell you a little bit about what's happening in their school communities and what they're doing to solve some of this issue.
ACSA's legislative lunch break starts now.
And it's a couple of minutes after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications, along with Megan Baer, who for some reason just dropped off my what on earth happened over there, Megan?
Just trying to keep you on your toes, Naj.
Okay. All right. Folks, if I could show you what it looks like on the host desk over here, the number of cables and apparatus that we have here now to make sure that my audio actually works, because the last time, Megan, as you will remember, my audio was about as bad as it could have possibly been.
Yeah, I thought I was going to have to solo host. I was a little nervous.
I think it would have been just fine if you had done. You've been in the co-host seat often enough that you were about to give our guests the instructions on how to deal with the various chat features. So that tells you that you've been on here long enough, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
No solo hosting for me though.
There you go. Edgar on assignment today. Coming up, we'll talk about declining enrollment. As we mentioned in the open, it's a challenge across the country. We're going to talk about specifically what's happening here in the state of California. I want to say hello to a few of our guests on the chat. Neri Pais, of course, Neri is there. First one in the chat today. Jason Angle is with us. Ellen Wheeler, and my good friend Susan Denton, who a few years back, Megan, I don't know if you were here at that time. But a few years ago, Susan Denton, who attended the University of Arizona, and I, a San Diego State grad, both teams were playing each other, and we decided to do an on-air bet on who would win, and I won. So Susan had to, give us a shout out from her school district. So Susan, with us today. Susan, good to have you guys all here. Let's go ahead and do a couple of news headlines right off the top. And Megan, the last time you were here, we talked a little bit about the zero emissions buses in Oakland Unified, how they had transformed their transportation situation. They had moved 74 electric buses in and got 74 of their gas vehicles out. Now there's the funding available from the state of California for more school districts to be able to do this. The state launched the statewide funding program aimed at putting 1,000 zero-emission buses on the road, with $500 million set to be distributed to school districts and other educational entities. Now, this is part of that zero-emission school bus and infrastructure program, and applications for the funds are being accepted now through September 30th. The money comes in addition to $91 million that the Biden-Harris administration providing to help California school districts switch to zero emissions vehicles. So, Megan, that money now available. And this is a story that is on EdSource, and it kind of caught my attention with referring to school violence. Now, there's federal data out there showing a decrease in campus crime, something being reported on the basis of data from the National Center for Educational Statistics. Now, here's some of what is published in there. According to this piece, in 2022, the first year that students nationwide returned from pandemic virtual learning, students reported incidents such as rape, robbery, assault on campus at a rate of 15.6 incidents per 1,000 students, down from 24 incidents per 1,000 students in 2018. Other data that came out from this, 19.0% of students reported bullying compared to 27.8 in 2010, 2011. Although, as you would agree, Technology certainly more useful now than it was back in 2010 and 2011, but the bullying numbers went down. 5.5% of students said they observed gang presence in their schools, which is nearly half of what the data suggests from 2018 to 2019. School safety expert says that a lot of this is the result of administrators, of educators pouring resources into improving school climate and implementing social emotional wellness programs. Here, Megan, and this is the one data point that really stuck out to me, and we talked about it here, about school violence and guns. It's worth reporting. According to the reporters on this story, school shootings are at an all-time high despite their rarity. So we've talked about it so often here about gun violence in schools, and the numbers certainly up, even though it's a bit of a rarity. So a couple of news headlines for you to start the day, to start our show with us. So let's go ahead and let's switch right over to our main topic. We're talking about declining enrollment, Megan. And we've got two great guests with us today. Matt Best is the superintendent of Davis Joint Unified School District in Northern California. Also, Daryl Camp, superintendent of San Lorenzo Unified School District in the Bay Area, and our ACSA vice president. Also, I have to say, also the ACSA board champion for cornhole is Daryl Camp. We'll talk about cornhole in just a second, but I just want to make sure all of our viewers know it was Daryl Camp in the highly, highly competitive cornhole game. Him and Jason Province from up in Region 1 were the big winners. So to both of you, welcome. Let me just get this right out in the open, because as we've mentioned, declining enrollment is a problem nationwide, not just here in California. And it's going to be an issue moving forward when we consider lower birth rates and all of that. But for the both of you, your districts are in a unique situation when it comes to your student populations. Matt, I'll have you start, and then Daryl after that. What are some of the obstacles that you guys are facing in your school communities with respect to declining enrollment?
Yeah, thanks, Naj. I'm glad you let me go first. It's always tough following a cornhole champion. So we've been experiencing declining enrollment for the better part of 20 years here in Davis. So this is not a new challenge for us, and that really before the last 5 years, that major decline had been a function of not having new housing development in Davis when the university was continuing to grow. So we've been masking that declining enrollment with interdistrict transfers, which 20 years ago, that number was around 100. Today, it's around 1,400. So nearly 15% of our student population in Davis is here on an interdistrict transfer, mostly residents by employment. Making things a little more challenging for us here in Davis is we're one of the lowest funded districts in the state. I think we were number 18 of the lowest funded out of more than 1,000 districts. So what that means is we get about 80 cents on the dollar compared to the average funded school district. And we continue to try to find that right balance between fiscal solvency, employee compensation, and funding. But that conversation is getting harder when you've got limited dollars and there's just more and more pressure on those limited dollars. And as you decline, the economics of decline, you've always got to stay as far ahead of that reduction in revenue because your expenses are hard to cut in real time, as we all know. We cut about $6.5 million from our budget last year from our general fund. And as I look forward, that it's going to continue to be a challenge for us moving forward in the next few years.
And Daryl, the obstacles your district has been dealing with.
Yeah, so like Dr. Best, Matt pointed out, it's every situation has a uniqueness to their situation. For us in San Lorenzo, we're in the middle of the Bay Area, so as predicted, a lot of families are moving out of the Bay Area, seeking lower cost affordability housing. So they're going to other parts of the state and outside of the state. So I think we're experiencing that. Right along with that, the uniqueness of the Bay Area, there a lot of options in terms of school options. So families are seeking to take advantage of those options. And then I'm going to say on a national scene, we're right here when it comes to, I call it the resegregation of America that's happening. When you look at our student population, about 7% of our students consider themselves European American or come from European descent, which means we have about 94% of our students identifying as student of color. And people are making choices based on, the perception of where they can get a quality education or what they perceive to be a quality education. So that's all impacting us. We've had a decline similar to Davis, it seems like, over the last 15 years where our enrollment has declined. We've been declining about 2 to 3% per year for the last, like I said, 10 to 15 years. And during the pandemic, that decline was exacerbated. So one of the other challenges we've had though, is even with that decline, our revenues have gone up. When you think about LCF coming on board around 2013, and then you think with the pandemic, all the one-time funding that came, and then over the last 2 or 3 years, the cost of living adjustments have been substantial. I remember that one year we got to 13%. So it is one of our challenges is, trying to explain this dichotomy of our enrollment's going down, our dollars going up. So on the surface, it looks like you have more per pupil spending, and you do. But the other part of that is, like I tell my kids, it's a fool that only looks at one side of the equation, right? So the revenue side, the expenditures have also gone up, and that sometimes is hard to communicate, and rightfully so. Even we've had, when by the time we get to the 25-26 school year, our employee compensations will have increased over 30% over a 4-year period.
Right.
That's a large expenditure, right? And that doesn't include the health benefits. Well, it does include the health benefits, but the retirement benefits, which is something that we contribute significantly to, and those are all increasing our expenditures. Not to mention the other things like workers' compensation, insurance, and gas. When gas prices goes up, those impact school districts. So
right.
That's part of our uniqueness.
Yeah. So Matt, Davis Joint Unified had to reduce kindergarten classes earlier this year. We've got a better, more clear state budget picture now. When you're making those decisions, the state picture is a little more foggy. Has that changed the local conversations as you're looking forward into the next few years?
Yeah, I think a little bit. So I think we're down about 100 kindergartners from what we projected last springtime for this current year. And part of what we're trying to understand, this is a pretty precipitous drop in one grade that was unexpected. So part of what we're trying to understand in any given year is this a new trend, or is this an anomaly? Particularly these kindergartners, this is the cohort who were born in 2020. We know there was a lot of disruption to school and family life in that year. And so we're hoping to understand that here. We just started school on Monday. So by the end of this week, we'll know a little better of what that number is actually looking like. And I think, when I think about the budgeting conversation, and Daryl sort of hit on this as well, is that there are forces that are working together for us as a district. And for me, it's thinking about how do we maintain excellent academic programs, fiscal solvency, and employee compensation. If any one of those gets out of whack, you're in trouble. And so trying to find that right balance while you're in the economics of decline, with uncertain state budgets, declining revenue, increasing expenditures, so much of that is outside of our control. So making as many deliberate and thoughtful decisions as possible is really critical. And I think some of the things we're doing to be as ahead of that as possible is, one, just talk about it often, educate our community, our staff, our bargaining associations as frequently as we can about all the factors that impact our state budget. We are tracking enrollment really closely. We actually are moving up our enrollment for next year into the fall, as opposed to waiting to the traditional springtime, so we can make better decisions in real time. I think you folks here at Davis hear me say this all the time, but when you're faced with an intractable problem, you got to bring it to the light of day. You got to start talking about it as openly and transparently as you can, because that's how you find the best solutions for your community.
Let me just clarify for our viewers who may not be as familiar. Matt, you said 100 fewer kindergartners in your school district. How many elementary schools in your district?
Yeah, so we've got 8 elementaries. Our usual kindergarten cohort is around 500. This year, it's coming in around 400.
Okay. All right.
And the last thing I wanted to say, Naj, sorry to interrupt, is just about housing. In Davis, we haven't built enough housing in the last 25 years, and we're paying the price for that now. I just don't think we as school leaders can afford to wait any longer to really start talking about housing in our respective communities.
And I really like you making mention of the moving up the enrollment date. That seemed like a key point there. Folks, if you do have questions for Daryl or Matt, go ahead and put those into the chat. Daryl, let me ask you about your district, because your district has seen a decline in enrollment from about 11,000 students to about 8,000 within the past decade. In fact, you had made mention a 2 to 3% drop each year over the past 15 years. So in June, your district proposed merging 3 schools into a new magnet school for arts and community transformation. What are the next steps in that process, and what approaches are you considering?
Yeah, I'm just say first, thanks to ACSA staff and compliments to the ACSA staff for doing the research of trying to tap into our own local conversation.
It's all Megan, Daryl. Come on, it's all Megan doing all that.
I'm just impressed. You got that in. You got the cornhole in. That was great. That was a phenomenal cornhole match last month, though. That was exceptional. But our conversation that you tapped into and saw one of our news or press releases really has been an ongoing conversation in San Lorenzo. We've constantly explored how can we best serve students, and sometimes gets lost in the declining enrollment conversation is the desire to more adequately serve or provide the best learning environment and opportunities for our students. So that's been an ongoing conversation over multiple years. The particular school that we're talking about is a specialized art school, high school in our district. We have 3 comprehensive high schools, but one of those is that specialized art school, and it's typically a small school. So as we actually shifted that school in 2020, where the location was moved from a smaller site into a more comprehensive high school campus. But we've had for the last 3 years, we've been engaged in what will be the next iteration or the next spot for this particular school. And within that, obviously, what drove the conversation to move the school in the first place was if we were going to staff that small school according to the enrollment, then it would be hard to offer as comprehensive a program. As you are aware, smaller schools, they usually take more resources in order to run. You're talking principals, you're talking secretaries, you're talking custodians, you're talking all the utilities associated with that. So when we proposed to staff that school according to the enrollment, it was really obvious, and a number of people said, well, let's just shift the school. But it was a temporary placement. So now what we're trying to do is figure out what will the next iteration look like. And the proposal that we came up with, that we shared with the board in June, was to create a 6 through 12 campus, actually combining one of our middle schools, one of our comprehensive high schools, and that art school into one new campus, and to create something new and better for students. All of those particular sites are experiencing a version of declining enrollment. And with the decline at all 3 of those sites, that means we're having to ask questions about the programs that we can offer to serve students. And once again, the programs and how adequately we can serve students. But make no mistake about it, that's where the conversation starts. Mm-hmm. Is that declining enrollment is something that kind of spearheaded it, but we're asking a deeper question, which is, what do we have to do to create an environment to better serve more students? Mm-hmm. The same conversation could be had with elementary schools as well. We have smaller and smaller elementary schools, and even though that's not on the docket right now, we were talking about that back in 2020. Obviously, with the pandemic and the increase in funds, and our focus wasn't on this during the pandemic. We suspended those conversations, but that doesn't mean that the issues have gone away. But one last point I'll make is when I talk about serving students in a better way, is another downside of having small schools is the collaborative approach. Just think about it. If you're trying to create teacher teams that have deep, rich conversations about supporting students' learning, And in our elementary school, for example, we have about 2 grade levels at each elementary school. Well, if you and your partner are, communicate well, that's great. But sometimes there's something synergistic about having more teachers in the room to collaborate about student achievement, and it provides more options. So we're trying to have that conversation about internally what's going to be right for us. We haven't figured it out, but we certainly certainly are in this exploration stage currently.
So Matt, what is your district doing, working on? What have you done to keep schools open and classes? And as you look into the future, what does that look like for Davis?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One, just always working to bring more students in. Advertising, streamlining the enrollment process, making it as easy for folks to join our DJUSD family as possible is always a top priority. And then I think when I'm thinking about elementary enrollment in particular, because that's where we're seeing our most significant decline, is working to design programs that help families with young children and to make our district as attractive as possible. This year, we launched a high-quality, low-cost after-school program that's available at all of our elementary sites. It's free for students on free and reduced lunch, and then it's got a fee. We also have the same sort of setup for preschool programming, working to expand that to all of our elementary sites. We're continuing to watch those demographic projections and reports closely and adjusting in real time as much as possible. And then I think just continuing that discussion, Daryl, I think said it beautifully about what's the kind of academic program you want to serve students the best that you possibly can. What's the relationship to that program and its fiscal solvency? And then really, we're really hitting the housing discussion hard here in Davis because there is a relationship between funding, enrollment, attendance, and housing, and try to make that as front and center in our community's mind, so they understand as much as possible of what's happening, and that gives them the context for the decisions that are being discussed and made in real time.
We have this comment here from Dr. Terry Metzger, and she writes, also the expansion of TK impacts K numbers. We've had 2 years of declining K numbers, and this year quite a jump in transitional kindergarten. So it is interesting to just think about how one impacts the other, and getting those students into the classroom for transitional kindergarten, how that may boost up some of those numbers for kindergarten. So I guess, Daryl, what advice would you give to LEAs that are struggling to keep some of their schools open because of declining enrollment?
Well, like Dr. Best was saying, I think the best advice is to talk about it, to bring it to light, to have the conversation so more and more people can realize the complexities of trying to manage this dynamic of declining enrollment. So everybody needs to be a part of the discussion. So when critical decisions need to be made, then there's more likely that people have the information and a base to know how those decisions are being made. I would also say, even though it seems to me there's a lot of emphasis on playing in the competitive space, that is a part of the equation. But essentially, all we're doing is shifting students around then, and absolutely, it's one district or LEA, could be charter school, also benefits, then somebody else, another LEA will quote unquote lose. And that is a part of what we're considering. But I do think the state, we need to constantly consider, right? There's only a certain amount of kids, right? And unless the birth rates pick up, that amount of kids will shrink. So we're just divvying up the kids differently. So I will say, and kudos to some of our charter school partners in my prior district, we learned from our charter school that we were the authorizer. They kept saying in multiple years, we have a waiting list for a dual immersion program. We have a waiting list. Well, that kind of shifted our thinking to say, if there's a waiting list, that means there's more demand for the supply of dual immersion offerings in our quote unquote community. So it did spark us to start a trilingual program in that particular district. Central Valley, 80% Latinx, Latino, Latinx students, and we decided to launch a trilingual program. So one might ask, well, what was that third language? The first two are obvious, right? Spanish and English. Well, we brought in Chinese too. So our kids were learning Mandarin, Chinese, and English with the thought that with our proximity to the Port of Stockton, that this could provide a natural link to opportunities for so many kids. That was our thinking. In the Bay Area, I haven't found the magic bullet because the dynamics are completely different. But like Matt said, communicate early, acknowledge the struggle. And when you're talking about, schools and utilizing the space differently, that's a community conversation, and there is a loss there that needs to be acknowledged. Just has to be acknowledged. And then I would say my last piece of advice is talk more about serving students and less about the declining enrollment. There's a huge downside of running small schools. There's a positive side too, easier to form personalized relationships, but clearly there's a downside as well. And that's breadth of opportunities. You can imagine it's hard to run a full range of visual and performing arts programs at a smaller school. That's just one example.
It's really interesting to hear the pivot and looking at what parents really want for their kids. And so I guess, Matt, I would ask a similar, question to you, if there's been any strategies that have worked well and resonated with the families, and any advice you'd like to share with your colleagues that are in similar situations.
Yeah, I'd say you heard me say it to start with, just engage in that transparent, open dialogue with your community. I think part two that I'm thinking about, and sort of playing off a little bit what Daryl was talking about, but really exploring the options about what school could and should look like, and then what impact that has on student learning, students furthest from opportunity, your bottom line, all that sort of stuff. And then I think, we've got to start having a more deliberate conversation in California about the link between the economic conditions that exist in our state, housing, and schools. They're all interconnected. And the more that we can understand that as individual school communities, the more we can impact our local legislators, our state legislators, and helping our state become a more attractive place for young families to live and hopefully have children who join our schools and propagate that work moving in the future. So that's my best advice.
There you go, folks. Matt Best, Superintendent of Davis Joint Unified School District, and Daryl Camp, Superintendent of San Lorenzo Unified School District. Matt and Daryl, so great to have you here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Nash, Megan. Thanks, Matt.
Yep. Take care.
Megan, I do want to point this out, and maybe I would just get your reflection on this, especially because you have younger kids, and as we've talked about on this show, my wife being a kindergarten teacher. Heather Agarda puts in the chat, we've experienced a decline in TK and K numbers, with preschool still an option for families. They'll choose that option for the smaller classroom environment. I know that at least in my school community, which I know is unique, living out in the sticks in Elk Grove Unified, they've actually added a full kindergarten class.
Oh no, Naj has frozen. Naj, you got to repeat it. You froze. You're back.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I was going to say in my wife's school district, they've added a complete additional kindergarten class there. So now they've got 3 kindergarten classes and a TK. I don't know if that's been a similar experience that you've seen in the area where you live, but according to Heather here, one does kind of impact the other.
Well, I think we're in this really interesting time because we've got preschool, TK, which is optional, kindergarten, which, we all kind of expect kids to go to kindergarten, but it's actually not mandatory either. Mm-hmm. So we've got all these expansion of early learning programs, and it looks totally different in every community. So there isn't affordable preschool everywhere. It sounds like Heather might have a really good affordable or free preschool option. So I think it's interesting when you look in these you look in these communities, you have booms with a bunch of kids going to TK, or if it's a really slim TK offering, maybe the kids are staying in preschool. Working families, they need that wraparound care. So I think that's a place where you see the families choosing to stay in preschool. So it's interesting. I think it's different everywhere.
I would agree. Folks, we have lots to tell you about that's happening here at ACSA, and we don't want you to miss anything. First off is our ACSA Leadership Classroom. Now, our guest yesterday was Dr. Luke Wood. He's the president at California State University, Sacramento. A student who has just kind of grown through public education, who's a better example of this type of award as Dr. Luke Wood. We usually try to keep these conversations 20 minutes. This one went on for like 40. It's one of the greatest conversations you'll ever listen to. Go ahead and go to Apple Music or Spotify, download that, or you can watch it on YouTube as well, the ACSA Leadership Classroom. Also, we want to tell you about Behind the Bills. There's the Leadership Classroom. You can scan either one of those QR codes and you'll get to the Leadership Classroom. Also want to tell you about our Behind the Bills podcast. This is with Yvonne Carrillo, ACSA's Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. Get all of your latest news that you don't necessarily get here, plus a great conversation. You can go ahead and get both of those on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. And of course, if you like what you've seen here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we invite you to like us on Facebook and subscribe to us on YouTube. When you do, you'll get reminders about our normal Wednesday show, our regular Wednesday show. It's never normal here. And if we're coming on with breaking news, you'll get an alert about that too. So go ahead and like and subscribe to us. And of course, if you have great stories happening in your school community, we want to tell your stories as well. Go ahead and send in your news releases, your talking points, your photos to our EdCal editor, Michelle Carl at mcarl@axa.org. Before Megan leaves, it would be wrong of me, since she challenged us, to not show the photo of the cornhole winners from the ACSA staff one. There's Edgar and myself. That is Megan challenged. Now, I guarantee you see that stupid photo 7 times, right? 7 times. That's number 3, Megan. I'm telling you now, we've got a countdown going to see when we get to number 7. And we're going to feel good about ourselves after we do that.
When are you and Edgar going to play Daryl and Jason, I think you said? When's that like head-to-head match coming?
Part of me feels like the board retreat next year should actually be like those 2 designated teams. And let's actually see how that whole competition goes. We'll take a photo of Edgar and I after we beat Jason and Daryl that time. I'm calling it. I hope Daryl is still on in the background, so we got to hear that. I'm calling it right there. Edgar and I will win that. Folks, thank you so much for joining us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We are live and interactive Wednesdays here, 1 p.m. on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.